Hargraves draws a distinction between two different kinds of reality shows. So the recovery shows that are the focus of this article, and then makeover shows, of which The Biggest Loser would fit into that category for Hargraves. In terms of makeover television, um, there's a sort of narrative of progress. People start out in a certain state, and then they improve themselves, and then they get to a kind of end point. Often these shows involve a personal transformation, whether it's weight loss or makeovers or plastic surgery. There's some sort of individual transformation. There is a fair amount of shame used on these shows. Uh, I wouldn't say that there's a lot of shame in a show like Botched, but certainly in the weight loss shows, there's a sense of shame for being a certain weight that's built into the narrative of these shows. Often the individuals are the ones that express being ashamed, um, but that is very much a part of the narrative of makeover television. These shows end with what Hargraves calls a big reveal. The experts show how they've reconstructed this individual, both physically and their sense of self-worth. So that is kind of the end point of makeover television, which isn't quite the same as the individuals that are on recovery TV. So recovery TV is very cyclical. Uh, the addiction is documented, the recovery is documented. There's often a relapse that leads back into addiction, which leads again to recovery. So what Hargrave says is recovery TV is not linear in the way that makeover television is very linear, starting with an issue, showing a personal transformation, and ending with that kind of big reveal. Um, in terms of recovery television, so the first two scenes there are from Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew, and then the bottom one is from Hoarding Buried Alive. In fact, the top scene features Jeff Conaway, who was a television star featured on a show Taxi, who was in really, really bad shape on Celebrity Rehab and eventually died. Didn't die while on the show, but did eventually die. And below that is Tom Sizemore, another famous actor that popped up on the show that had some pretty significant addiction problems. So recovery TV for Hargraves focuses on a spectacle of inappropriate behavior. There's often only a vague commitment to change on the part of the addicts. Certainly, we saw that on Celebrity Rehab, but you see it on intervention too. There's not always a sense that the folks on intervention are there to change. Sometimes they're just there to be, their story is being told, but they're not necessarily moving towards an improvement or a change. Um, the shows are heavily involved in a loss of control on the part of those being featured. You hear that in the stories that are told, and you see that very much in how the shows progress. These shows are highly gendered, even though they feature both men and women. The position of the subject is very much a feminized position. Um, the the kind of humiliation that goes on these shows by revealing these really intimate and troubling details of one's life, Hargraves argues puts the individual being featured in a feminized, gendered position. The the shows themselves are often set to highly melodramatic music, um, which again is part of the narrative structure of these shows. Uh, Recovery TV um, steers its subjects towards self-improvement through a professional intervention. Um, there's sort of an unclear justification as to why the person is participating in these shows. So certainly in the case of intervention, it's almost a complete deception, if not a complete deception. They think they're being featured as part of a documentary, but in fact this intervention is being staged by their friends and family. Recovery TV will often refer to the turbulent upbringings of the people being featured, some sort of traumatic experience or catastrophic experience in the lives of the individuals, often some sort of demographic factors that go into these people's lives. When I wrote about intervention, I was very interested in the stories that were being told about family, that all of these issues had their origins in some sort of family trauma or some sort of trauma. And my co-author contended that trauma and addiction are connected. But what troubled me about intervention was that there's always a reason, right? There's always a specific piece of the history of the individual that's pointed to as causing the addiction, even if it were many, many years before the addiction were to manifest itself. The narrative of the show always focuses on a specific moment. That there's some sort of source material for the behavior of the individual. Something caused this. My co-author referred to it sometimes as a Hail Mary on the part of the producers, going way, way back to, parents getting divorced when a child was 4 or 5, and now they're an alcoholic at 20 or 30. So the shows themselves always point to some sort of source for the issue. In particular, intervention has a narrative structure that almost every show follows. So it begins by documenting the addiction. Then there's a focus on the addiction's impact on friends and family. And then there's the actual intervention itself. That is the way in which the show progresses almost every time. What's interesting is that the kinds of interventions undertaken on this show are very uncommon. They don't occur in most cases, either on the part of the addict showing up to the intervention or the families following through. And then the kind of inpatient treatment that the show intervention gives to its participants for free would be very, very expensive. 90 days of inpatient treatment in California or Arizona, or usually somewhere warm, would bankrupt any middle class family. It's just beyond the reach of almost anyone. The clips that we're going to watch are one is a scene from Linda's story that is in the article, and you can just get a sense of what her scenario was like. And I've also included the clip from Funny or Die that's referenced in the article that I really think speaks to the issues that are raised in this article. Ultimately, no matter how we look at it, intervention frames what you are seeing as spontaneous, unexpected, and authentic. And it's not just intervention, it's all of these shows. And very much the clip that you're going to see from Linda, which was partly on the show and partly not on the show, really does demonstrate how the show is reinforcing the spontaneity and the authenticity of these narratives, and then follow that with the Funny or Die clip.